Hi, everybody. It's still me. It's Josh. This is what's been under the beard the whole time. A little bit of change for him, but I wanted to join you virtually to share the last of our Torah. I had the privilege to deliver in person inside the shul. The last Shabbos that we met inside. Now, please God, hopefully the weather will continue trending upward, and we'll be able to start meeting again soon. We're already we're moving the gears for that. But I wanted to share this Dvar Torah, which actually was it's the same parsha and the same special maftir. So Kitisa, but we're going to focus especially on Parshat Parah, the special section on the Red Heifer and its response to Tum'ah mace, which means impurity garnered because of contact with death. It's quite poignant that in the midst of this new stage of our response to a growing health situation, our Torah reading calendar has us chanting Parshat Parah. This passage has long stood as the prime example of a ritual that just doesn't make sense. Its details particular and obscure, its ritual choreography mystifying. While I leave its specifics to the realm of chok, laws without explanation, I think its themes strike a chord within us, especially in this moment. What is the ritual of the Red Heifer, and what is it responding to? The ashes of a burnt cow are used to make a potion of sorts that is used to cleanse all those who have been impurified by contact with the dead. Or, in other words, facing a universal outbreak of infection, Tum'ah, a treatment is developed to help restore the body. While the arcane laws of Tahara and Tum'ah, purity and impurity, are hard to make sense of, especially to the modern mind, God's Torah has a sensitive understanding of the reality and function of infection. As, when we grapple with the laws of purity, we are always concerned with degrees of contact and proximity. You can be a Rishon L'Tumah, a Sheni L'Tumah, in terms of the degrees of closeness to the source of the impurity. Not only that, but as we have recently become quite familiar, liquid surfaces help to transmit the status of Tum'ah to another object, providing it a medium of transfer. And that's the case both in Tum'ah and also with this that we've been experiencing. The Torah understands the intricacies of how delicate our social lives are, the promise and the peril of what it means to be in community. We are there for each other in support, but we can also find ourselves to be potential sources of danger. Recently, we have been asked to practice social distancing, in which potentially sick people are asked to self-quarantine, and even those out and about are asked to be less intimate. There's a sadness here, and a real sense of loss, as anxiety permeated the air. And precisely when we may find ourselves feeling the most afraid, we are deprived of intimacy and sources of support. In the thick of the Torah's description of the Parah Aduma process is tucked a pair of baffling lines, whose import seems unfair, but once we understand them more deeply, they will yield real wisdom. In verses 7 to 8 it reads, "After burning the heifer, the priest will wash his garments and bathe his body in water. After that, the priest may re-enter the camp, but he will be unclean until evening. The one who performed the burning will also wash his garments in water, bathe his body in water, and be unclean until evening." That is to say, the priests who were involved in creating the cure for Tum'ah mate, death impurity, which is the most severe, are themselves now impure and must purify themselves before they can re-enter society. It hardly seems fair that the ones who are in the breach, trying to help people, are themselves struck by the same malady. I think actually we've seen that in our own experience in terms of essential workers, right, being on the front line, or people working in the health care field who are out there but who are helping the most, but on the other hand are also the most exposed. So there's a real wisdom here, a real understanding, as that is the way of the world. The Torah is quite aware of the nature of proximity. To cure the people from their exposure to death, the priest had to expose himself to death and was left impacted by that exposure. Perhaps the Red Heifer solution, in a sense, was the first vaccine, using the source of the infection itself to cure the disease. In describing the tragic yet heroic priest made impure, the Torah is also teaching us something essential about the reality of infection. To ensure the community's safety, the priest has to isolate himself and cleanse himself, only allowed to rejoin the camp once the condition has passed. You may think the opposite, since the verse reads, "And afterwards he will come back to the camp, and the priest will be unclean until evening," which makes it seem as if the priest first returns before the cure has done its work. But Rashi insists that we reverse the clauses, that the Kohen only rejoins the camp after dark, once the Tum'ah has passed. Our sacred choreography of halacha is concerned not just with ritual, but with the well-being of the society that keeps it, making sure that potential sources of risk are kept secure until the danger is past. I think those of us who have had to be in lockdown, or those of us who had to self-isolate for 2 weeks, understands this principle quite immediately. Theoretically, we could imagine the priest merely keeping to himself, making sure not to infect anyone else. But the Torah understands that while certain exceptional individuals could make sure that that's the case, we're always safest with a law that appreciates varying levels of ability and rules according to the safest common denominator. Thoroughness is essential when it comes to people's well-being. Verse 8 instructs the priest to first wash his clothes and then bathe his body in water, making sure that any potential media of communication are disinfected and cleansed. Not only that, but the Aderes Eliyahu highlights that the 40 seah of water needed to make a kosher mikveh is not merely a random ritual number. Why is it 40 seah? It's the amount of water necessary to ensure that the entire body can be immersed and washed. In washing our hands today to limit the rate of infection, we need to follow the Torah's example of thoroughness. It's an odd opportunity for mindfulness. We are patient. We use the full 15-20 seconds required to scrub our hands. While there are many memes which have floated about with songs you can sing and the like, I found it a quite meaningful experience and even a kind of ritual that during this time we have 15 to 20 seconds to think of others we care for, to think of our community at large, because our thorough acts of hygiene help keep them safer. In a way, it's avodat kodesh. It's an act of holy service. The Sifra, the Tannaitic Midrash in Vayikra, also makes the stakes clear. Commenting on the second priest, who must also cleanse himself, the Midrash suggests that one might think it's merely a Gezerat HaMelech, a decree of the king, that the priest must immerse, like the Kohen Gadol, i.e., that it's just a rule, which asks only obedience. However, the Midrash makes clear and makes sure that we see the connection between ourselves and others, our states and the well-being of our neighbors. The priest needs to cleanse himself to make sure he is fit for service once more. After all, a priest is a public servant, a functionary whose role is to make sure we have access to the divine. But he cannot serve that function if he is a potential source of danger for others. Our hearts and minds must be on others, but we must also make sure our bodies are fit to be in proximity to them. Rashi, in his comment on verse 7, underscores the spiritual nature of all this ancient medical choreography. The camp from which the priest was expelled was that of the Shekhinah, God's presence. That seems very stark. Indeed, that is what we are to make our society, a residence for the divine. To take your absence from it isn't to be rejected by God, but rather to recognize that participation sometimes requires distance, and that to take care of yourself to make sure that you can rejoin the holy community again. As the Sfas Emes commented on God's request that we make for God a dwelling place, that it would be in us truly. For God to be in our midst, we need to exhibit the caution and care to which the halachos of Tum'ah have us attend. We must keep ourselves physically healthy, because we must keep each other's safety, health, and well-being foremost in our minds. To that point, we are left with a challenging dilemma. To keep others safe, we must be mindful of proximity and potential infection. But that leaves us open to a spiritual sickness, as we sit in isolation, limiting our contact to others, deprived of potential sources of support. I think we at Bethlehem understand that quite intimately in terms of our own preclusion from meeting again in our shul. But God willing, now with the vaccine being distributed, we'll be meeting again soon, Kenahara. It is in this light that the highlighting of the priest is relevant. The Kohen in Kabbalah is a manifestation of the sphere of chesed, of loving kindness. The priest was not merely a temple ritual functionary, but was the conduit of God's love and concern in this world. Today, we are asked to exhibit care in more of a gevura type way, by maintaining boundaries. But we also must find opportunities for safe forms of chesed. Since we may not see each other as much or as easier, it's on us to make sure that we still reach out to loved ones, to friends, to family, to shul members, or new acquaintances even, via phone, text, the internet, and this is the one time I'll praise social media, or Zoom. Zoom is not the same thing as hanging out with other people, but through Zoom, I've had the blessing of still maintaining a connection with so many learners of Torah in our community, so many people through the services that we've offered. It's not the same, but to see your faces has brought me such joy and so needed element of connection in my life, and I feel so grateful for that. We now have so many ways to be in touch, so let's make sure we keep on using them to make sure our community knows that we are on our minds. On Twitter, God help me, before Shabbos, a year ago, I saw a letter written by two lovely young men from our own city of Toronto, who posted it in common spaces in their apartment building. Here's what it read. Hi neighbors, an offer to help. If you or someone you know in the building is at increased risk, feels uncomfortable, or is unable to get groceries, run errands, pick up medication, etc., we're happy to help. They provide their contact info, and then they say, if others want to help out, feel free to add your contacts here. Social distancing does not mean we can't stick together. How chesedic is that? As we as a community approach this challenge, we must attend to its physical, medical ramifications, but also the spiritual and emotional consequences it entails. Please, 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 if you are in spiritual or emotional need, you are always welcome to reach out to me. You are always welcome to reach out to the Chesed committee of the shul, and we will make sure you have what you need. Let us not forget that, or what, in truth, Tum'ah teaches us, that truly we are all connected. Good Shabbos. I'll see you soon.